was the first mistake. Just hiss, crackle, pop. Then a voice. It wasn't German. It wasn't even human. They told us the Black Forest was haunted by ghosts, but we were hunting Nazis, not fables. Now I know better. That night, I heard the message they were sending back. It wasn't a distress call. It was a lullaby of the dead. The year was 1944. The place was a forgotten stretch of the Black Forest, deep behind the advancing Allied lines. Sergeant Elias Vance, a communications specialist from Tennessee, didn't believe in fairy tales. He believed in vacuum tubes, radio frequencies, and the grim necessity of war. Vance and his three-man reconnaissance unit, a hardened mix of demolition experts and medics, were on a desperate mission: locate and neutralize a newly discovered German command and control bunker. It was nicknamed Projekt Nachtmusik, or Projekt Night Music, by Allied intelligence, due to the strange, intermittent radio signals it was emitting, signals that sounded less like encrypted communication and more like fragmented, distorted music. The forest itself was a character, ancient, oppressive, and silent. The canopy was so thick that even at noon the woods felt like a perpetual twilight. The air was cold, damp, and smelled of pine needles and decay. They found the entrance on the third day. Hidden beneath a tangle of thick rhododendron bushes was a reinforced steel door, the kind built to survive a direct bombing. It was chillingly modern against the medieval gloom of the woods.
Nachtmusik, Vance whispered, tapping the cold steel with his knuckles. Let's see what symphony they're playing.
They breached the door with shaped charges. The explosion was muted by the surrounding earth, swallowed almost instantly by the forest's silence. The smell that rushed out wasn't gunpowder. It was a thick, metallic stink, like rust mixed with a slaughterhouse. The bunker was a network of dimly lit concrete corridors. It was abandoned, but not deserted. Uniforms were neatly folded, coffee cups sat on desks, and in the mess hall, half-eaten meals had petrified on the plates. The German soldiers hadn't fled, they had vanished. As Vance navigated to the radio room, the dread deepened. The only sound was the scuff of their boots and the sporadic drip, drip, drip of water somewhere out of sight. They reached the communications hub, a cramped room filled with early-generation German radio equipment. The main transmitter, a massive, imposing piece of machinery, was still active. A faint, low hum emanated from it, vibrating through the concrete floor. Private Miller, the youngest of the crew, pointed to a chair. "Sergeant, look!" Slumped in the operator's seat was a skeleton. It was clad in the tattered remains of a Wehrmacht uniform. The skull was oddly elongated, and the jaw hung slack. Most disturbing was the headset. The headphones were not on the skull, but fused into the temples, the wires seemingly growing out of the bone. Vance ignored the rising bile and stepped up to the radio controls. The dials were set to broadcast, not receive. Whatever they had been sending, they had been doing it until their last breath.
He reached out to kill the power, but Miller cried out, a sharp, choked sound. "Sergeant, the logbook!"
On the desk lay the radio operator's logbook. The last few pages were not filled with coded messages or frequency settings, but with frantic, looping drawings, incoherent spirals, jagged lines, and, chillingly, rows of perfectly drawn human eyes.
The final entry was one word, scrawled so hard the pen had torn the page. Hurrin. Listen.
Suddenly, the transmitter's low hum spiked into a high, whining pitch. The lights in the room flickered, casting long, dancing shadows of the fused skeleton onto the wall. Vance's heart hammered against his ribs. Kill the power, now! He slammed his hand onto the emergency stop switch, but nothing happened. The whine intensified. And then the music began. It wasn't music in any conventional sense. It was a chaotic blend of frequencies, a high-pitched whine that felt like needles in their eardrums, interspersed with static that sounded suspiciously like whispered, multi-layered voices. Miller clapped his hands over his ears, his eyes wide with unadulterated terror. "It's inside my head, Sergeant." Vance fought through the auditory assault. He stared at the skeleton, now vibrating slightly in the chair. He realized the Germans hadn't been sending a message to anyone. They had been sending a message out, and something had sent one back. His eyes scanned the equipment, landing on a small secondary receiver, a shortwave set used for localized field communication. He flipped it to monitor the outgoing transmission. What he heard was an echo of the chaos, but focused, distilled. It sounded like an elderly woman singing a nursery rhyme, but played backward, layered over a sound like heavy, ragged breathing. And then a clear, unmistakable voice cut through the noise, speaking in perfect, unaccented English. It was calm, measured, and utterly devoid of warmth.
"We are receiving, children of the forest. The door is open. Send more, please. We are so hungry for the quiet."
Vance felt the blood drain from his face. The music wasn't a signal. It was a beacon. The German operator hadn't been transmitting information. He had been transmitting fear. He had been broadcasting a frequency that acted as a channel for something ancient, something that had slumbered in the Black Forest for centuries. And the Nazis, in their desperation for a new weapon, had finally woken it up. The skeleton hadn't just died at the radio, it had become part of the apparatus. He turned and saw his medic, Corporal Davies, staring blankly at the wall, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. "Davies, snap out of it!" Vance yelled, but the corporal didn't react. Instead, Davies slowly, deliberately reached up to the side of his head, where his combat helmet met his temple. He began to scratch, then press, then dig with a single trembling finger, right where the skeleton's headset had fused. His eyes were unfocused, but his lips were moving, whispering inaudibly to the noise.
Vance knew, with a paralyzing certainty, that the thing on the radio was talking directly to Davies now. It wasn't through the headphones, it was through the silence between the sounds. He grabbed his rifle, the weight of the metal the only real thing left in the room. He had to destroy the transmitter. He raised the stock to smash the central tube. Before he could strike, a low guttural cough came from the far corner of the room, near a utility closet they hadn't checked. Vance froze. It was Miller, but Miller wasn't covering his ears anymore. He was standing motionless, facing the wall, his shoulders twitching uncontrollably. Slowly, he turned his head, and his eyes, now wide and black as wet coal, locked on to Vance. The low, humming broadcast was interrupted by a loud mechanical clack. The main power switch on the transmitter flipped from on to off, all by itself. The room went instantly, utterly silent. The oppressive whine ceased. The whispering voices were gone. Vance stood there, his rifle aimed, panting in the sudden void. He could hear his own blood rushing in his own ears. Then, the power in the entire facility flickered back on, a small, hesitant surge, and the main transmitter screen, dark only a second ago, displayed only 3 words. Not in German, not in binary code, but in a chillingly modern, sans serif typeface. Thank you, Elias.
This transmission log was recovered from the ruins of the Black Forest bunker by an Allied cleanup crew in 1946. Sergeant Vance was the only survivor, found miles away, catatonic, clutching a piece of paper that only bore the mathematical symbol for infinity written in his own blood. He died in a military asylum 3 months later, reportedly listening for a voice that only he could hear.
You've seen their stories, but the darkness has only just begun.